Every great guitarist that inspires you was at one point an intermediate who struggled to play through the chord changes. Now, learning how to play through the changes is in some sense a rite of passage on the guitar. So to make this process of melodically playing through chord changes easier, today we're going to cover how to map out our arpeggios onto their scale shapes, how to find multiple arpeggios across the neck using our triad shapes, and how to tastefully apply these arpeggios within our improvisation. If you don't know who I am, I help intermediates become more advanced players. The goal of this channel is to teach you all the information that you need in order to get past that intermediate rut stage. Now, if you want to dive deeper into your learning of this instrument, I recommend you check out our school community. There is a link to it in the description. And for the first couple people that are joining, I can't do this to everyone, but I will be giving out free private lessons to a few people that join the community. So make sure you join as soon as possible. It is first come, first serve. Again, a link to that is in the description. So, what is an arpeggio? An arpeggio is the individual pieces that make up a chord. When we play an arpeggio, we play the pieces that make up these chords separately rather than playing them all at the same time. So for example, if I had this G major triad over here, I can play the chord together like this, or I can play the pieces of the chord separately, the individual notes, to create an arpeggio. Essentially what the arpeggio is, we're just breaking down the components of what is making up our chord and playing the notes individually. The reason arpeggios are going to help us with improvising through the chord changes is that the notes inside our arpeggio shapes always contain chord tones. This means when we play the correct arpeggio shape over the correct chord in the chord progression, every note we play is going to sound melodic. This helps us get out of the habit of aimlessly noodling around scale shapes. So, to make sure that you can follow along with this video, you're going to need to understand how to play the major scale all across the neck, how to harmonize the major scale to turn the notes into chords, and then how to use those chords and break them down into triads. And again, this might sound like a lot, but if you don't know this, you're in luck, because I've already made a video on all the key details we're going to need in this video. You can either watch my full guide on YouTube, or again, there is a free course in the school community which you can watch in your own time. And there are some nice diagrams over there as well. Seeing as arpeggios are broken chords, let's look at how we can break down our chords inside our key signature using triads. So we can play the triads in our key like this. Now I'm going to play the root position triads in G major, and we're going to skip the 7 chord because it kind of sucks. But if we play the root position triads in G major, we get this. We can also level this up by adding in the inversions for each root position triad chord in our key. So we can play the root triad, and then we have inversions that stem from them. So we have 3 different places to play each chord in our key. So that sounds something like this. We keep running through it until we kind of run out of frets on the fretboard, but it would sound something like this. You can see it gets a bit difficult once we get up to the higher frets to play each triad and its inversions from the root position. But hypothetically, this works all around the guitar neck. You could just move this shape down 12 frets over here. Now, seeing as we have a root position and 2 inversions that branch out and stem from it, this gives us 3 different spots across the neck in order to play an arpeggio. We're going to highlight the individual notes of the triad and add in a couple extra notes on the high E string for the shapes that we're going to learn today. And they all stem from the triad positions and inversions. So if you know all this stuff, just adding in these extra notes in order to arpeggiate them isn't going to be too difficult. So we can do this for every diatonic chord in our key, and this works for every single triad shape. So let's learn the shapes, and then we can figure out how to use them tastefully within our improvisation to improvise through the chord changes. We're going to start with our 1 chord in our key, and for G major, this is the 1 chord is G, and we're going to start with a root position triad, and we're going to turn that into an arpeggio. So our root position triad is like this, and you can see there's a diagram on screen on how to play it, and all the scale notes that are surrounding it. So the notes that are highlighted in red, these are the scale notes. The ones that are coloured, they are the arpeggio notes. So we play the arpeggio like this. So that's 5th fret on the D string, 4th fret on the G string, 3rd fret on the B string, 3rd fret on the high E, and then 7th fret on the high E as well. And then if we go to our first inversion, we also have an arpeggio over here. So that's 9th fret on the D string, 7th fret on the G string, 8th fret on the B string, 7th fret on the high E, and then 10th fret on the high E. If we play that all together, we have... And then our final arpeggio shape is going to be around the second inversion over here. So that's the bar on the 12th fret. So if we play the 12th of the D, 12th of the G, 12th of the B, 10th of the high E, and then the 14th of the high E as well, we get this. So right there we have 3 different spots across the neck to run through an arpeggio for a single chord. So we can go like... So this gives us a spot to play melodic notes over one specific chord in the progression all across the fretboard. The thing is, we can do this for every single chord in our key. So the 2 chord, our minor chord, in the key of G major, the 2 chord is A minor. The root position looks like this. So we start on the 7th fret of the D string, 5th fret barred across the G, B and high E, and then we go to the 8th fret of the high E as well. So that sounds like this. And that takes place all around our root position, A minor triad. Now if we go to the first inversion of the A minor triad, we get an arpeggio shape that looks like this. So it would be 10th fret on the D string, 9th fret on the G string, 10th fret on the B string, 8th fret on the high E, and the 12th fret on the high E as well. So that gives us this. And then we're going to go to the second inversion of A minor, which is around the 14th fret of the D string, 14th of the G, and 13th of the B. It's our second inversion right here. And then when we add the high E in on the 12th fret, and then to the 15th, we get the notes that we need for our second inversion arpeggio shape. So that sounds like this. And again, you can pair all of these together. To give you spots all across the fretboard to play a certain chord. Now, the shapes are going to be quite similar across most of the chords. So, our third chord in the chord progression, our 3 chord, which is going to be B minor, we can play the B minor root position like this. So yeah, we play the exact same arpeggio shape here. So that's 9th fret on the D string, 7th on the G string, 7th on the B, 7th on the high E, and then this is the 10th on the high E. So that gives us this. And then we can do the exact same shape with the first inversion for this chord as well. So we get 12th on the D string, 11th on the G, 12th on the B, and then 10 to 14 on the high E. And then again, for the second inversion, we can do the same arpeggio shape for our 3 chord. So that gives us 16 on the D string, that gives us 16 on the G string, 15th fret on the B string, now 14 to 17 on the high E. Nice. Now let's move on to our 4 chord. So if we play the root position for our 4 chord in the key of G major, That's the chord C. So we start on the 10th fret of the D string, the 9th fret of the G string, the 8th fret of the B, the 8th fret of the high E, to the 12th fret of the high E as well. So that gives us this. And then for our first inversion, we start on the 14th fret of the D, start on the 12th fret of the G, and the 13th fret of the B string. And then it goes from the 12th fret to the 15th fret of the high E string. It's all located around our first inversion triad shape over here. And then we can go to the second inversion triad shape, and we can make this into an arpeggio as well. So we play 17 on the D, 17 on the G, 17 on the B, and then we go from 15 to 19 on the high E, giving us that arpeggio shape. And again, all of these, if you know your triads and inversions, you can arpeggiate all the way across the fretboard. So we have our 5 chord as well. That's going to be the chord D major. We play our D major root position like this, and we can turn that into, you guessed it, another arpeggio shape. And we play that on the 12th fret of the D string, 11th fret of the G, 10th fret of the B string, and then on the high E from the 10th fret to the 14th fret. So that gives us this shape. And you're going to notice that a lot of the major and minor shapes are very similar. It's just it changes for a couple chords in our key depending if it's the 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, right? So we have our first inversion of the 5 chord, which is going to be D major in the key of G. And now that starts on the 16th fret of the D string, 14th fret of the G, 15th of the B, 14 on the high E, and then to the 17 on the high E. So that gives us this arpeggio shape. Now our second inversion for D major, because this is the 5 chord in our key, there's going to be one note that's slightly different. So we play the usual second inversion triad, and that's located on, you can either play it all the way up here, or we can play it down here on the lower frets. Let's do it down here actually, because it makes more sense. So we play the second inversion like this on the 7th fret of the D string, 7th fret of the G string, and the 7th fret of the B string. And then we go from the 5th fret of the high E to the 8th fret of the high E. So that gives us this arpeggio. And that one specifically works over the 5 chord in your key. This is a dominant 7 arpeggio. Nice. Now that we've got our 5 chord triads and arpeggios out the way, finally we're going to go on to our 6 chord. So we can play the root position up here on the 12th fret. So we play the 14th fret of the D string, 12th of the G, 12th of the B, and 12th of the high E, and then go to the 15th fret of the high E string, giving us this arpeggio. And then we have our first inversion from there, and again we can arpeggiate that too, so that we play the 17th fret of the D string, 16th fret of the G string, 17th fret of the B string, 15th fret of the high E, and then to the 19th fret of the high E. So that gives us this arpeggio shape. And then we're going to move down the fretboard again, because it doesn't make sense. If you don't really have too many frets, you're not going to be able to play the next shape up there. So we have our second inversion for E minor, and we're going to play this on the 9th fret of the D string, the 9th fret of the G string, 8th fret of the B, 7th fret of the high E, to the 10th fret of the high E. So that gives us. And you can see on the diagrams that all of these shapes are located within the major scale positions across the fretboard. So you're going to want to practice like diatonically going up and down each arpeggio shape, like. And again, trying to do that with each inversion too. So we have like. And again, you can do this for the second inversion too, so you could go like. And you get the idea. This stuff works for every single triad, every inversion across the major scale. Now, in order to understand how to play these musical ideas fluently, you need to be able to recognize how these concepts relate and branch off of each other. So what do I mean by that? So for example, we need to know first off just how to play the major scale, like just in its simplest form across one string. Then we need to know how to turn each of those notes into scale degrees. From there, turn each scale degree into a chord. And then, when we figure out those chords, we can turn each chord into like a triad shape. And then we can turn each of those triad shapes into arpeggio shapes, like we've just gone over earlier today, where we have. And so on and so on, and you can do that for every single inversion across the fretboard. Now, every one of these concepts stems from our understanding of the major scale. So once you know how to play the major scale across the neck, all of these musical concepts that might seem separate start clicking together as you realize they're actually all related to each other. So you might have this experience before of learning all these different things on the instrument and not really realizing why you're learning them. You might not realize that a scale is actually very much related to these arpeggio shapes. All the notes that you're playing in these arpeggio shapes are also contained inside of these scale shapes as well. So the more that you learn, the more you dive deep into these concepts, the more you understand they're all connected, and then you're going to find new ways of using these things that you're spending time to learn on the instrument. So now that we know how to turn our triad shapes into arpeggio patterns, how do we use them to tastefully and melodically improvise through the chord changes? Well, the very first step of improvising through any chord changes is first off knowing what chords you're actually playing over. So let's say, hypothetically, we're playing over a 1, 6, 5 progression in the key of G major. Now this gives us the chords G major, which is our 1 chord, E minor, which is our 6 chord, and D major, which is our 5 chord. So once we know the chords we're actually playing, so this is going to be G major, E minor, and D major, we want to play the root position triads just across the fretboard. So that gives us G major, and then E minor, and then D major. So it's good to know where our root position chords are for each chord in our chord progression. So now we're going to pick one of these triads as our anchoring point in which the inversions for the other chords are going to orbit around. This allows us to improvise without having to jump all around the neck. So we're going to choose G major as the root position, and then we actually get a first inversion E minor and a first inversion D major right next door. You can see that I'm not having to jump all around the fretboard when I do this. This is why your inversions are useful. It allows you to compact everything in the distance of just a couple frets, which is going to make your improvisation a lot easier, especially when it comes to adding in these arpeggio shapes. So yeah, figure out your chords, then pick one chord as a place that all the inversions are going to orbit around. So we're going to work in this position over here around the G major root position. So to improvise melodically, we're going to highlight the chord with the arpeggio shapes and then embellish with our scale tones. You can see I'm going to put some diagrams up on the screen for the arpeggio shapes that I'll be using. the notes that are highlighted in red are going to be the scale tones that you want to embellish your arpeggio shapes with. So first, let's just quickly go over the arpeggio shapes for each triad in this position. So we have our G major root, then we have E minor first inversion, and then we have D major first inversion, and then back to the G major again. Now let's see what I can do to improvise over these chords using these arpeggio shapes. You can hear the first time I went round those chords, I kind of stuck to the arpeggio shapes quite rigidly. And then the second time, I embellished the arpeggio shapes by walking around the scale tones. So you want to use a combination of these arpeggio shapes and then see where your scale actually fits over the top of those shapes. And this is how you're going to be able to melodically improvise through the chord changes. You want to think about the chord tones first. The chord tones are from the triad and the arpeggio shape, and then you kind of want to spice up those chord tones with some scale tone. You can also use this little shortcut, which I've kind of figured out from just messing around with the scale for a long time, that allows you to play melodic sounding notes over the current chord you're playing. So if you take any point from your triad and then go up 2 scale degrees, you're always going to get a melodic sounding note, right? So if let's say I pick this note over here for our G major triad, and I go up 2 more scale degrees, so that's 1, 2, I'm always going to get quite a melodic sounding, harmonious sounding note. Now this is because whenever you go up 2 scale degrees from any point in your major scale, you're moving in the distance of a third. Now a third is quite a melodic sounding interval, right? So this is going to be a nice little kind of shortcut or hack you can think of to always play a melodic sounding note from any point you are in the scale. So just mess around with playing the major scale and hopping around and skipping a scale degree, and just go up 2 scale tones. So you can see from here, 1, 2, 1, 2. You can hear when you do that, that's quite melodic. It's quite a nice kind of little shortcut you want to think about when improvising using the major scale and finding those chord tones quite easily. So let's see what happens when we improvising using our triad and arpeggio shapes combined with the idea of going up 2 scale degrees, i.e. also known as like moving in thirds. So let's see what happens when we try this. So when we move in thirds, you can see this actually leads also into new triad positions, allowing us to always constantly be moving up across the neck. And we can apply the exact same methods if we choose the G major first inversion as our anchoring point. So if we recognize that the chords we're playing over are a 1, 6, 5 chord progression, we can actually play the chord progression like this using these triads. So we have 1, then we have 6, and then we have 5 over here. So we get a first inversion G major, we get a second inversion E minor, and I get a root position D major. So I can do the exact same concept as before, running through the arpeggios, and then messing around with the scale tones, but now I have a new place across the fretboard to do this. And once you figure out how to pair these together and keep moving across, this is what's going to make you sound like a genius when it comes to improvising through the chord changes. You're going to always have new ideas to come across because you're going to have multiple places around the fretboard to play these ideas. So let's see what I can do when I mess around using the arpeggios and scale shapes over in this part of the neck. So to tastefully apply these arpeggios to your improvisation, you can see you don't actually have to rigidly play through the whole entire arpeggio shape. And you do not have to apply the arpeggio from all 6 strings. You'll see like metal shredders on YouTube teaching these arpeggio shapes from all 6 strings, which gives you this like kind of really awkward shape to play. And the thing is, you're never really going to be playing all 6 strings. The way you want to think about this is like you don't even really have to do the whole thing there. You just want to use these shapes as kind of guidelines on where to find your chord tones. And how you choose to phrase them, the rhythm that you want to choose to go between these notes is completely up to you. You can just use 2 notes. You can maybe use 3. And kind of embellish with a scale tone. Maybe use all 4. And again, you can walk into that note there with a scale tone. As long as you're landing on one of those shapes inside of your triad or arpeggio, you're always going to hit a chord tone. And you want to kind of finalize on that chord tone. But the point I'm making here is you're rarely going to find yourself running through an entire arpeggio, especially on all 6 strings. So what's important here is learning how to tastefully use those arpeggios. These are just guidelines. Doesn't mean you have to play through the whole thing, but it's very useful to know what you can do. Doesn't mean you have to use all of it. You want to use the arpeggio as a guide, and then from there you can embellish with the scale tones that are near those arpeggio shapes. Also, try skipping a scale degree and moving around in thirds to sound more melodic, right? That kind of idea. Now, the more you work on this, the closer you're going to get to be able to improvise through the chord changes like a musical genius. But the thing is, you can only really do so much with these arpeggio shapes if you don't really know how to articulate your notes very well. So, to learn how to solo with a greater sense of feel in your playing, you're going to want to check out this video that I made for you over here.